Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. Joined today with Steve and Taylor, and we're going to be diving into the Duke and Illinois game. But before we do our deep dive into the game this week, Taylor, what stood out from you from all the college games last week?
I think the performance of Garrett Nussmeier, probably. More than anything, I think there was a lot of question marks. I think people were kind of getting, and you could probably say I'm in this tier too, but I had Sawyer Robertson as my top quarterback. I thought he performed well against Auburn. Obviously didn't get the win, but I think Nussmeier was kind of the guy that everyone was talking about at one point. And then you know how that kind of loses its appeal when you get closer to the season. You start hyping up the John Mateers, the Fernando Mendozas, the Lenoris Sellers. If you're Bill Sparks, you're hyping up the Aidan Childs, who also looked really good. But I think Garrett Nussmeier solidified himself. Say what you want about his, size, his arm strength. Maybe it might be a little bit of a question mark, but the way he diagnoses pre-snap, I thought that put him on another tier ahead of a lot of quarterbacks in this class. So I think, he's firmly in the conversation to go very high in the 2026 NFL draft. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, so for me, it's a guy that you like a lot, and I'm seriously considering putting John Mateer, into first-round conversation. I was very impressed with that performance, very poised. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. But overall, football tends to always be overreaction season, right? And, we do what we do because we're looking for certain things. And it's interesting to scroll social media and various websites. And there was so much disappointment. They wanted Ohio State and Texas to have, 100-point, combined score, which was never going to happen. Right. I personally didn't think that the Tar Heels were going to win the game against TCU. And, unless my math is a little off, they didn't, but there were some interesting takeaways. I think it was, knock on wood, at least it was a relatively injury-free week one, which you always like to see. And now here we are, right? NCAA, yeah. NFL, we're here.
So there were some good games. I got to watch a lot of the TCU North Carolina game. I mean, granted, that was the only game that was on that night, so it was easy to catch. And I caught the Notre Dame. Who did Notre Dame play? Notre Dame, Miami.
Yeah.
Okay, so Notre Dame's quarterback, I know he's not in the draft, but, that's the guy, right? Because if your first start is on the road at Miami, okay, he looked a little rusty the first quarter. Rusty for a guy that's never played a snap college football, right? He settled into the game, and he has that team on his shoulders. So that was somebody that stuck out to me. And then TCU had several players pop. TCU has a tight end that we're going to need to cover soon. And then TCU also has a transfer running back who is really difficult to tackle. I don't think he's going to hit any home run, long runs, but in the short area, he's going to be difficult to bring down. So I was really impressed with TCU running back, and his last name is Barnes.
Yeah, Kavorian Barnes.
Kavorian, yeah.
Yep. And then TCU also had an edge that was making a lot of plays.
Was it Ansel Din Mbua?
Yeah,
we talked about him on the Sleeper podcast.
We had him on the Sleeper show.
Shout out to EJ. Shout out to EJ. What a call. Yep. What a call.
Yep.
Okay, so I have to pay closer attention to EJ then. Because obviously I'll tell you, I didn't remember the players.
And whenever it is that we're going to get into safeties, I forget, October or November, man, I love Bud Clark. I love him.
Yes.
And he had the pick six Monday night. And, but, you brought up a good point with the Notre Dame quarterback. I'll give you a guy who really impressed me, considering it's his first time on the field. I'll just use the initials because I don't want to mess up his name with Bill Sparks not here. But the quarterback for Cal, JKS, What a game he had. He committed to Oregon, right? And then right around Christmas time, he decides to enter the portal, winds up at Cal, and what a start for the freshman. Obviously we got a couple of years to go, but hey, who knows? Maybe they have their next Jared Goff, Aaron Rodgers coming out of Cal in a couple of years.
Yeah, and there's going to be in October a freshman. Is that when Durst does freshman? No, okay. The one in October is going to be Durst checking in on the quarterbacks, but Durst also does a thing where in December he analyzes all the freshmen. So I love the call out for freshmen because these are players that we should be paying attention to. There's a lot of data about early breakouts, meaning if a player breaks out as a freshman, that tends to put their draft stock higher. And a great example, actually, in this class, it's one of the Florida wide receivers. It's Eugene
Wilson.
Yeah, I was going to say Is it Eugene Wilson? It's Eugene Wilson the third, I believe, right?
Yep.
So Eugene Wilson the third had a great freshman year, but then hasn't done much since. But he's really high on everybody's receiver list right now, kind of thing. So, Steve, you brought up Bud. What was Bud's last name already? I've already forgotten it. The safety from TCU, Bud Clark. There we go.
Bud Clark. Yeah.
You brought up Bud Clark, and in the Illinois Duke game, we have two good safeties. So good segue. Taylor, which of the two safeties do you like more? Terry Moore or Miles Scott?
Yeah. So, we talked about this a little bit in the pre-show. I love Terry Moore. I think Terry Moore is a day two guy. I think I really like, we covered him on the cornerbacks and safeties kind of podcast. So, when we first dove into this class, and I really thought that he was just one of those players that consistently did his 111th on the field. And I think that's so important. Like you can only do your job, right? Like you don't want to try to do someone else's job because then the play will get blown up. And I think pretty much every time I watch Terry Moore, he's in the right spot. I love the versatility that they use with him. 50% of his snaps were at free safety, 25 in the box, and then 25 in the slot. So he's able to move around and he's able to be really, really versatile on that defense. And that's kind of what one of our talking points was, Steve and I talked pre-show is Terry Moore tore his ACL in the Gator Bowl in 2024. And he just tore his ACL. He's not going to be available to play until hopefully October. So we won't see any Terry Moore, but there are two players that are going to try to kind of fill in the Terry Moore role. So Terry Moore will not be on the field this Saturday, but Caleb Weaver, a transfer from Sam Houston State, safety, had 97 tackles, 4 interceptions last year for Sam Houston State. That's one of the guys. And then Deshaun Stone, who's a 6'3", 200-pound strong safety. He's a redshirt sophomore, I believe. He's only played 18 career games, only 2 career starts, but he does play special teams, and he actually plays almost all of his snaps at free safety, which is kind of unusual for a 6'3" guy to not play that much in the box. So I think between those two are going to have to, shoulder a lot of the weight of kind of filling in Terry Moore's role, whether that be in the box, in the slot, in the back end of the defense. So as a prospect for the NFL, I love Terry Moore more than Miles Scott. I think he is the best safety in this game, but he's not playing. So these other two guys, look for them to step up. And I really think Deshaun Stone can be an impact player as well. But like I said, just a sophomore. So keep your eye on him. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, so we'll stay with the safeties. I agree with you on Terry Moore. Looking at my notes, I definitely think he's day two conversation. 6 feet, just under 200 pounds. A lot of splashy plays in 2024. 2 forced fumbles, 4 interceptions. I love his footwork and his ability to come down and close. PFF, it looks like, gave him an 89.2 grade. There is some positional versatility, I think, with him. Mm-hmm. So you go to my NFL team, the Jets, now with Aaron Glenn and Steve Wilkes. They tend to like that kind of defense where there's versatility, guys that can, be in the big nickels, in the quarters, that could go between the safety and the nickel position. He's a great fit. His speed isn't the greatest. He did have a relatively high missed tackle rate in 2023, and he did improve on that. But again, so staying with the safety position, because you asked Jim, let's go to Miles Scott, right? So I have him just below 6 feet at 5'11". Man, he's played a lot of football, right? I have him at over 800 snaps in the last couple of seasons. He is a leader, very reliable defender. He is a little on the older side, I think. He's a 5th year, but I don't think that really matters. He actually played receiver, right, for a couple of years there before he moved over to the other side of the ball. He's got good ball skills, but if I had to pick between the two, I do favor a little bit more than I do Scott.
Yeah.
Do you think both of the safeties are draftable?
Yes.
Miles Scott, that would be Miles Scott and Terry Moore. I have to remember to repeat the player names for those listening. It's like the three of us are looking at a player list, but the audience doesn't necessarily get to see that. But Taylor, how about you? Do you have draftable grades in both Miles Scott and Terry Moore?
I do. Yeah, I have a draftable grade on Terry Moore. I have him in the day 2 range. Obviously, it's going to kind of depend on how he comes back from that injury, right? How high that goes. And I think to Steve's point, we'll see how he tests, especially coming off that injury, because I think that's going to be a pretty big factor. I have Miles Scott I think I gave him around 6 grade when I graded them the first time. And I think part of that is I did watch the Penn State game, and there were several occasions where, and again, Penn State has 2 very, very strong and very, very good running backs, but he just got ran over by Nick Singleton and Katron Allen a couple times. So I think his size is a little bit on the small side. So that's my only concern with him, but I definitely think he's draftable on day 3. And I actually think while we're here with the safeties for Illinois, there's another safety that I wanted to talk about, and that's Matthew Bailey. Matthew Bailey is a redshirt junior. He's 6'2", 215 pounds. He had 94 total tackles last year, forced 2 fumbles, 7 pass defenses, an interception. He's an interesting safety because he's only 15% of his snaps come at free safety, and over half of those came in 2022. 75% of his snaps are in the box or in the slot. He's kind of similar to a guy we covered, Jalen Kilgore, out of South Carolina. He's very similar in that he's a big body, but he's going to play in the slot. He's going to play close to the line of scrimmage. And I'm a huge fan of what he can bring to the table, like from a size standpoint. So he's just another guy I wanted to note here as well in the back end of the Illinois defense.
Yeah. Why don't we stay with the secondary? Why don't we switch now to the corners? So we've got Chandler Rivers with Duke. Right. So pick one to start with, T.
All right, let's
actually can I rewind that just a little bit right before we begin? So Steve, is Xavier Scott your highest rated player in this game? Or do you have a player in this game that's rated higher than Xavier Scott?
Oh, in terms of Illinois,
any
for sure,
position on the board.
It's Gabe Jacas for sure.
That's my highest.
Okay.
Yeah.
But okay, yep. I didn't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to see where you guys were on Xavier Scott. But okay, so Xavier Scott, Chandler Rivers, Xavier Scott, corner for Illinois, Chandler Rivers, corner for Duke. Taylor, which one do you like more?
Yeah, so I actually gave them both a day 2 grade, but I was watching some. I don't remember what I was watching. I maybe was watching some other film, a game that I didn't watch originally of Xavier Scott's, and the more I watch Xavier Scott, I think I prefer him, and I think why is because he plays in the slot about 60% of the time, which I think just gives him a little bit more area to move around. I think Chandler Rivers he plays 80% on the outside, but he's a little undersized for someone that plays 80% of his snaps on the outside, so that's a little concerning to me. But Chandler Rivers' ability to come to the line of scrimmage on screens or, swing routes or, whatever it is, when the ball, he kind of reminds me of a Trent McDuffie in the way that he attacks the line of scrimmage. Like when the ball is going to the line of scrimmage on his side of the field, he's beating that block and he's making a TFL or he's impacting the play in some way. So I really like that about Chandler Rivers. But Xavier Scott, to me, I think he just has really, really good ball awareness. He's a good tackler, especially when he can wrap up the legs. And he did that several times in the Penn State game that I watched, especially against the bigger backs that Miles Scott kind of struggled with. And I think he's a fun corner to watch. I'm interested in if you noticed this, Steve, when you're watching the film from Xavier Scott, do you notice that he lines up on the right side of the defense, whereas most prototypical cornerback ones line up on the left side of the. I don't know if you noticed that or not, but that was something that I noticed pretty repeatedly. He almost exclusively lines up on that right side. So I thought that was interesting.
That's an interesting. I didn't notice that. I was looking that I think he has some very diverse usage for man and zone. I think you mentioned just now, the ability to go between being an outside corner or be in the slot. But I did notice, the man zone. He's not a burner, staying with Scott, that is. Not, I don't have him as a burner, but he processes very quickly. Nothing on either one of these guys really stood out from week one, whether the, game against Western Illinois or who did Duke play? Elon. But let's face it, with all due respect, they didn't have to, right? Those were the better teams, the better teams that won. It's interesting you brought up the McDuffie thing. I was thinking about Mike Hilton, is a comp that I have for him. So, and going real quickly over, that was on Scott, on Chandler. By the way, I think before we finish up on Scott, it's the Broncos jersey that made me think, that PFF gave him an identical grade as they did to Zadeh Barron, wow. Denver's first round pick in 25.
And that's interesting you say that, because we have covered Xavier Scott on this station already. And I might say that you guys having second round grades on Scott felt low. Right. There are some draft professors that really like Xavier Scott. But it's interesting that you say that, because one of the comps was Zadeh Barron, in that Scott is labeled as a corner, but realistically, some people are saying he might profile better to safety. But he could still play slot and he could still play boundary. So there's definitely some flexibility to his game that people may not be talking about as much right now.
Yeah, 100%. I think that stands out with Scott. I think that stands out with, of the four defensive backs that I think we've talked about, both Scotts for Illinois, Rivers, and Moore. I think 100% Xavier Scott would be the top for me of those four, and I think he has the most versatility. And then following would be Terry Moore. And I think people were talking about it in the Draft Professors group chat on Twitter on Saturday, and how Duke's defense struggled in that first quarter against Elon, right? It was 10-10 at one point. The defense was kind of giving up some yards, some points. And I think a big reason for that was not having Terry Moore back there to kind of, lead the defense. I mean, that's what he's there for. That's kind of, one of his strengths, I think, in terms of just like aligning people, getting everyone on the same page, and then him doing his part specifically. So 100% agree on Xavier Scott's versatility. And I think that's kind of why, Chandler Rivers and Miles Scott are a little lower for me. I think they kind of have their roles, and they're kind of, they're good within those roles, right? As a boundary corner, as a safety. It's just there's some limitations there athletically and physically that I think hold them, in a tier below the other two.
Okay. Any other, I'm looking at the list. I don't see any other defensive backs. Is Gabe Jacas the highest ranked player for both of you in this game?
Mm-hmm.
How high do you have edge Gabe Jacas from Illinois right now? Taylor?
Go ahead, Taylor.
Well, right now I would have him probably a late first, early second round grade.
Okay.
I think I think his size, speed, athleticism, profile, production, all of it kind of lines up, and he's in for a really big year. 2 sacks to start the year already. He had 8 last year. So, I mean, I could easily see him kind of going beyond that. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Steve?
I think that's a fair assessment. I actually have him ranked right now as my 39th player. And in terms of edges, I'm running out of screen room. But, Ruben Bain is one of my favorites. TJ Parker, he's not up there. We'll see how the season develops. But, he is, it looks like I have him as my edge number 5 right now, if that's the thing. And Taylor and I had been talking, I guess we'll cover Gabe right now. In our offline, in our chat, we both had his versatility translates very well to the NFL, in terms of whether it's a 4-3, granted, a lot of teams don't stick to base anymore. They're bringing a nickel. And we both had the same feeling that, he would be such a good fit in like a Brian Flores defense. Right now, obviously he's in Minnesota. If, who knows, maybe he gets a head coaching job, but he just screams a Flores defender, / Viking, right? He is a very violent finisher, right? Taylor, you brought up the multi-sack game. He's got a couple of different moves already, right? And he's only going to get better. I mean, he's got the power, he's got the spin. He knows how to, certain people feel that this is an area of improvement. I don't really think so. I think his disengaging and his timing is fine. His integrity in the rushing lane, that stood out to me a little bit in one of the games that I started watching from last year. But let's see. I mean, 18.7 pass rush win rate. That put him 11th in the country. He's not afraid of linemen, right? He is not afraid. He is, he's 6'3", 275 pounds. But
in my understanding, so we did an Illinois team preview. There was an Illinois reporter who covers the Illini, said that Jacas dropped 15 pounds this year.
Okay.
So that 275, whatever the preseason is, we're definitely going to want to pay attention to. Does he look lighter, more explosive? In addition, Jacas is training with Lawrence Taylor's Taekwondo coach.
That's awesome. Yeah,
well, that's good.
I'm dropping the nuggets as I know them, but keep going.
That's good.
No, yeah, I think I thought when I watched the Elon game, I thought it was really telling for me that he was super disciplined in his run fits against an inferior opponent. I think when you're playing an inferior opponent, a lot of times you can try to do too much, right? Pad your stats, do whatever. He let the game come to him. He got a nice TFL because he held, strong setting the edge, 2 sacks, a forced fumble. I mean, he was everywhere in that game. And I know it was Western Illinois. I get that. And I totally get it. But you've seen the flashes last year on tape. And for him to have an offseason to put it together, come out in week 1, dominate an inferior opponent like that, I think it just sets the season for him to have one of the best seasons potentially in Illinois, pass rushing history. And I'll give you guys a little pop quiz here. So the single season sack record for Illinois is 16 sacks in a single season. Can you name the 2 players that are tied at the top for this record?
Not without cheating.
I saw this earlier today, actually. I didn't know that there were 2, but somebody mentioned one of them. It's been a busy day.
There's 2, and one of them stands well above. He's almost 20 sacks ahead of the field. He is 20 sacks ahead of the field for Illinois pass rushers all time. It's Simeon Rice. He had 16 in the season, 44.5 for his career. How about this for Gabe Jacas? He has a chance to potentially put himself in that range of 16 sacks. I'm not sure if he will get there or not, but he has a chance, right? 2 sacks in his debut. That's a great start, right? Whitney Merciless was the other player to do it. Jacas already has 18 sacks in his career. If he gets 5 more sacks, he'll be second all-time in Illinois history in terms of sacks. So he's doing some unprecedented things at Illinois, and I think, I think he might be in for a double-digit sack season, and I really think that I think he's not someone that's going to take any plays off, which I think is really, really, it's a trait that is overlooked, I think, a lot of times, right? It's like he's going to the quarterback, whether he gets there or not. Like there's a play in the Elon game where he extends his arm, and he looks like he has long arms on tape. He extends his arm, and then he spins around the defender, and he's got a free rush to the quarterback, but it's a screen to the other side of the field. But he didn't take that play off. He still whooped the offensive tackle for the rep.
I think I know exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So, I think there's a ton to like about him. And I think turning it on against, Big Ten play rather than, Elon, of course, will be a great tell. But all the tools are there for him to be a first-round pick.
I'm going to stick. There's a name that we didn't have on the list. I don't know if you had noticed I had added it earlier in the week. And that's, for lack of better words, Jacas' running mate, Leon Laughery Jr. Okay. He's, I don't have a grade on him at this point. He is a senior, 6'4", 245 pounds. He came over from Wisconsin. He's a very disruptive edge. He excels in tackling for a loss and creating fumbles. So with him and Jacas, they are a very nice 1-2 punch. He, meaning Laughery, he needs to be a little more consistent versus the run. I do think that's something that Jacas is, much more prolific at, but they complement each other well.
Yeah. Well, you want to stay with the edges and talk about that matchup there with the Duke right tackle that you wanted to talk about, Steve, with Brian Parker?
Yeah, let me get him. Yep, there. Sorry, Jim, throwing another one out there.
All
Brian
good.
Parker.
You don't have to apologize. We are here to cover the players in the game. That's what we're here for. So all good.
So Brian Parker II, I actually didn't put him down until I was getting prepared yesterday for the show. 6'5", 300 pounds. He's actually no sacks allowed in 2024.
Yep.
He was ranked among the top 25. Now, 6'5", 300. There are some that feel he could add on a little bit into the frame. He is a little slow out of his stance. You can trick him with some inside counter moves. I'm not so sure that when he makes it to the NFL, and I do think he has the potential. Right now, I would have a late day 3 on him. Mm-hmm. He may be one of the guys that might be better off sliding inside, and that's okay, right? We see that a lot of times. But there is the flexibility, not only for guard, but potentially center too. So that reminds me of, I think it was, who was it last year? Was it, I think he's in Pittsburgh, Troy Fatano, I believe, where he had that dimensional thing. I think at the combine, they even had him taking snaps at center. So I do think that Jacas and Laughery, however they line up, and that's a battle they can win because he is tricked. But I did want to bring him up. He is a team leader, and wanted to give him his due.
Yeah, I'm with you on him. I watched him, and I do agree. He's, a little slow out of his stance. I think he can stand to put on some weight, especially in the upper body. I think just getting a little stronger would go a long way. But I did write down some notes. He only has 20 career starts, but he was second team all ACC last year. He was PFF's 9th best returning offensive lineman, the 5th highest PFF pass block grade among Power 4 offensive tackles. And he has only given up 1 sack in his entire career on 761 pass block snaps. So I think we've talked about this at nauseum on this channel when we went over the offensive line, and we talked about it in the preview, I think last week with Auburn and Baylor with Connor Liu. And just being able to move along the offensive line vaults you up draft boards. We saw it with Donovan Jackson. We saw it with Gray Zabel, right? We saw it with some of these players that we thought, oh, they're guards, right? They'll play, they'll be day 2 guys, maybe 3rd round, right? But then you start getting them at tackle, you get them at guard, you move them around, and then all of a sudden they're shooting up draft boards. So I don't know. I don't think that Brian Parker's necessarily a guy that can trend up that far. But, I mean, don't be surprised if his versatility does, get him up in the 4th, 5th round.
Yeah. And on that note, if we want to jump
Parker
to
for sure in this draft class, or does he have another year left?
Good question.
That is a good question. I have their depth chart right here. It looks like he's a redshirt junior, so not necessarily guaranteed.
Yeah.
Okay. I was confident of that, but I like asking the question open-ended. So,
Since we're doing offensive tackle, why don't we cover J.C. Davis on the other side?
Yeah.
Now he's a senior, 6'5", 320. Transferred from New Mexico, All Mountain West first team. He is a very good pass blocker.
Yep.
He's not bad as a run blocker, right? He's very average. He needs some polish, especially how he moves laterally. 2024 started all 12 games at left tackle, and I thought I had the stat here. I thought I had how many sacks, if any, but I do not. There it is.
Only gave up one sack last year. Right. Okay. Yeah, and he did a good job for protecting Altmyer. Last week, 0 sacks. It's an interesting matchup against Wesley Williams. That's a matchup that I think J.C. Davis will win. Whereas before I was saying that Brian that Illinois had the edge. This time around, I think it's the same thing where the offense will win that one. But the reason why I wanted to switch to him is based on your point, because he's another guy that I could see that has that guard/tackle flexibility, and that helps you like you said. Yeah, I actually think Jim listed him as a guard when he sent over the name. So
I was about to ask that. So I have J.C. Davis from Illinois from a draft perspective listed as a guard, but my understanding is he is playing tackle for Illinois.
Correct.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think he's been covered a few different times on the channel. And so the story with offensive lineman at the Draft Professor is that if somebody's making a ranking graphic and they're like, Jim, I want J.C. Davis as guard. Jim, I want J.C. Davis as a tackle so they could build their picture. I'll just flip their position, and I don't necessarily flip it back or check that they finished whatever their task was. So you may see J.C. Davis's position flip-flop a lot, but my understanding is that he projects to the NFL as a guard.
Yeah, I think his athleticism is probably what puts him there, because I think Steve mentioned it. I think moving down the line, as a tackle, I think he is kind of sluggish in that aspect. I think he just has room to improve there. But in 2023 at New Mexico, he was the number 1 graded PFF tackle among G5 players, number 4 nationally. But what we saw last year from him, 16 pressures. He had 9 penalties, including a penalty in 9 of 13 games. So he had a penalty in almost every single game. So I think that needs to be cleaned up a little bit. And then he has 38 consecutive starts. So he's on the field, which is great, but he was dealing with some plantar fasciitis during preseason. So I definitely want to, kind of monitor that throughout the season as well. But yeah, I mean, to me, he's probably a day 3 guy, whether he plays guard or tackle. I mean, his size enough. It should be, there to get him drafted, along with the consistency and the how many reps he's played, right? So I think J.C. Davis is a good player, and I'm interested in the matchup because not only Wesley Williams on the outside, but I think Stevie brought up Vincent Anthony as well, who's 6'6", 250 pounds, what I have him listed as. 29 career starts, 9.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks in 2024. So I think that those two on the outside paired with Josiah Green, who's a Dartmouth transfer, and then Aaron Hill as well on the inside. Those 4 starting defensive linemen have over 5,000 career snaps played. So with those 4 being experienced going up against Illinois' offensive line, which obviously J.C. Davis is pretty experienced too, I think that matchup is going to be really, really fun to watch.
Staying with the O-line.
Yeah, and that should impact the running backs for Illinois, right? Because Illinois has 2 draft-eligible running backs that if you're building a draft board, you should probably have them on it. And ironically, I think on the list that I sent out, only one of them was listed, and that was Kaden Feagin.
Yep,
but
I've got some notes on
Laughery, the other one,
Laughery.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you never know how to go with that pronunciation. Laughery.
So which of the 2 Illinois running backs do you guys like better?
Go ahead, Tay.
As an NFL prospect.
Man, I know we talked about this on the show with EJ, and we've talked about it a little bit, and I've talked about it on some of my, Big 12 kind of Iowa State breakdowns, but their running backs to me mimic exactly what Iowa State have in Abu Sama and Carson Hansen. They have a big power back in Kaden Feagin, and they have the kind of shifty guy like Aidan. You say Laughery? Is that how you pronounced it?
That's how I said it.
Okay,
yes.
Laughery. So that's fine. I think what's interesting to me is while the hammer is Kaden Feagin, he actually has more career receptions than Laughery. So I found that to be really interesting, especially at his size of 6'3", 255 pounds. He obviously missed most of the year last year. So he really hasn't played a lot. He had a hip injury, but he has clocked 20 miles per hour before at 6'3", 255. He's a former 4-star. He was on Bruce Feldman's freaks list. Like all the tools are there for him to be a bruising power back. And like his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield as well, I think that kind of takes him a step ahead of Laughery, in my opinion. With the size and being able to catch the ball, I want to see more from Laughery in terms of receiving. Like if you're going to be, he's only 5'11", 200 pounds, I want to see him more involved in the passing game as kind of that lead back.
And Taylor Feagin was the one that's 6'3", 255.
Correct. Yeah, that's what is listed on. I don't have official measurements. I wish that I did, but that seems like a crazy measurement for a running back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Steve, how about you? Which of the 2 Illinois running backs do you like better?
So I actually have Laughery as a 2027, right? They're both juniors, but I think he's more likely to come out next year. I think Taylor hit it on the head. You have the flexibility with Feagin in the passing game. Not to take anything away from Laughery, because he is very explosive, right? He's got great burst and straight line speed that could make him into that home run threat against Western Illinois. 101 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's pretty good on, oh, by the way, only 9 carries, right? So an 11.2, yards per carry is pretty good. It gets skewed a little because you have those explosive runs. He has very good vision. He can find the cutbacks. Here's something with Laughery is I think he's the better one at pass protection. Even though there is a size difference, right? When you look at Feagin, who's, 6'3", I do think Laughery is the one who's better at pass protection. But, they got themselves a nice little thunder and lightning thing going on. The other thing with Feagin is, he missed the end of the year because he had that season-ending surgery. So, we'll see. But he also, 74 yards and a touchdown last week. So it's obvious, that he's healthy. So they do have themselves a nice little combo. And then, we brought up, J.C. Davis a second ago. And, we could talk Josh Kreutz. Let me, who's in the middle of that line. And I got to tell you, when I was going through names and, a little bit this year, a little bit last year, That one blows me away a little bit because when guys that I watched in the league now are seeing their sons come into the league, Olin Kreutz, who was a great center for the Chicago Bears, and now, his son is draft eligible in a few months. It blew me away. But, as far as Josh Kreutz, he's a leader. He's 6'2". He's a little bit undersized.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And hang on, I know I've got something else on him. I mean, 6'2" at 290 is good. He sets the protections. He's a great communicator. He keeps the cohesion on there. He's a good anchor. It's against some taller defensive tackles. There's a leverage issue. Taylor, what do you have on Josh Kreutz?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because his dad was on the all 2000s team, right, as the center, and he's actually the same size. 6'2", 292 is what he's listed as. So, if his dad could do it in the league for 13, 14, 15 years, whatever it was, 13 seasons with Chicago, and then he ended up in New Orleans, I think, for his last stop or something like that. But I think what I have on him is just he has 26 career starts. He's a team captain, kind of like what you said, so a leader. And obviously he has the bloodlines, right? He has the knowledge of growing up around the game. He saw how his father worked. He understands the grind that it is being in the NFL. So I can see him making an impact, as maybe like a backup rotational lineman. I don't really see him as a starting center in the NFL necessarily, but I do think that someone picks him up on day 3 and he, is competing for an interior spot somewhere.
Okay. I'm looking at the player list, and ironically, there's 2 quarterbacks in this game. We haven't talked about them yet. Darian Mensah for Duke, Luke Altmyer for Illinois are both draft eligible. My understanding is Altmyer, this is his last year of eligibility. Is Mensah for certain in this class, or does he have another year left?
He's only a redshirt sophomore.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
So which of the 2 quarterbacks do you guys like better from an NFL perspective?
Steve, you want to start on this one?
Yeah, you always give me the hard questions. Just for the sake of timing, I will say Altmyer, right? 6'2", 205, all Big Ten, led them to a nice 10-3 record. And, I think we do have to consider that Illinois may be ready to significantly challenge for a spot in the playoffs, right? And it's a large part, is that going to be on him? He's got good arm strength, accuracy. He does have mobility. It's not an elite arm, right? And I hesitate using that E word or the generational word, but in reality, it's not an elite arm. He can be turnover prone. He was very efficient last season. Obviously, had good numbers last week against Western Illinois, 217, 3 touchdowns. No interceptions. Even without Devin Moore, I think Altmyer's got to be a little careful with that Duke secondary because, fall into those secondary traps that Manny Diaz can throw in that, nickel style defense he likes to run. Another expression, and I apologize, but I'm going to use it, when quarterbacks are described as game managers, Altmyer projects to me as a guy you would say he's an efficient game manager. The sizing is a little different, but, he's got a little Minshew mania to him. That's my comp for him is Gardner Minshew. Taylor, why don't you take over and then we could talk Mensah?
Yeah. Let's talk Altmyer. Altmyer is also I prefer Altmyer to Mensah as well. And I think the reason for me solely is based upon play action. What Altmyer does on play action is honestly really impressive. He actually last year had almost the same exact numbers as Curtis Rourke, who we saw get drafted in the 7th round on play action. So Curtis Rourke was a guy who he only had 1 interception on play action all season, 14 touchdowns. Altmyer had 15 touchdowns and just 1 interception on play action. 10 of his 19 big time throws came on play action, and he only had 4 turnover worthy plays on play action. So I think, to me, the way you run an NFL offense, Altmyer to me is just more efficient at managing the offense. And again, Mensah's only a sophomore, right? We'll get to him in just a second. But Altmyer, the couple things that concern me about him are he did have a couple bad interceptions versus Oregon, one of which was just a deep ball that he just didn't see the safety lurking and just threw it as far as he could, and it got intercepted. They lose Pat Bryant. I think that's an underrated part. I mean, I think watching the tape, just going back and seeing how many plays Pat Bryant made for that offense, 3 game-winning touchdowns. And again, part of that is on Altmyer, but most of that was after the catch from Pat Bryant, right? So that's 3 games that potentially swung on the back of Pat Bryant. I'm not just saying that because I'm a Broncos fan. I mean, you go watch those 3 plays. I mean, they literally won the game in the late stages because of Pat Bryant, what he could do after the catch. And then another thing I noticed is his pressure to sack rate is about 20%. It's in the Shedeur Sanders range, which we do not want to see, right? That's kind of that day 3 quarterback. But again, I think that's kind of where Altmyer is, right? I think he's in that day 3 range, that late day 3. Curtis Rourke had a 26% pressure to sack ratio. So it's not impossible to overcome. What I need to see from him this year is do it in the big games. He only had 1 Big Ten game all season with better than 62% completion percentage. So he needs to step up against Big Ten competition. And I think this Duke defense is a great start and a great preparation for the Big Ten. Both of these teams, to me, are in like that 5 to 6 to 8 range in their conference, whether that's the Big Ten or the ACC. And both teams can make a pretty impressive, statement on Saturday with a win. So I'm excited to watch that. But I think just based off of the way that they run the offense and how efficient Luke Altmyer is on play action, I think that, he can really thrive in an NFL offense.
So, Taylor, you painted a picture on Altmyer, and I had to go do a quick Google search while you were talking. I'm having flashbacks to Steve DeBerg, the best backup quarterback in NFL history.
What a history he had, though.
Yes. So if you are not familiar with Steve DeBerg, he backed up Roger Staubach. He backed up Joe Montana. He backed up John Elway. He backed up Dan Marino. And he was awesome at play action.
Yeah.
Like, he had a sick play action. So, and I looked and they're about the same size. Right. So anyways, I just wanted to throw out Steve DeBerg. If you ever hear this podcast, hello. I was a fan. I had a football card of you when I was a kid. But we ready to do Darian Mensah from Duke?
Sure. Yep. He is a sophomore, good size, 6'3", 215. Joins Duke coming over from Tulane. He's got quick reads. He's got some zip. The numbers against Elon last weekend, 389 yards. A lot of that was, Duke pulling away late in the game. He can be a game changer because he does have a dual threat to his game. I'm not going to compare him with, say, Lenore Sellers, but he could develop into something like that. Right now, he had a very good freshman year at Tulane. Right now, I think for him, it's just about playing time and getting some more experience against, that Power 5. Taylor?
Yeah, this is a fascinating debate inside my head, right? Of which quarterback I think is going to be better. And to me, like their stats are so similar. 22 touchdowns to 6 interceptions last year for Altmyer. 20 touchdowns to 5 interceptions for Mensah. 17 big-time throws, 13 turnover-worthy plays from Mensah. 19 big-time throws, 14 turnover-worthy plays for Altmyer. Like, these quarterbacks are in a very similar range. The thing about Mensah, and this is my comp for him, and this is pre-transfer portal, so you have to bear with me here. If Jordan Love, right, was able to transfer from Utah State and go up and play better competition, like, I think that's the trajectory that Mensah could be on. Like, Mensah kind of has that. He has a little bit of an ability to maneuver the pocket, which I think is great. And like, there's a couple, I watched the Rice game from last year. It was a really interesting watch for me because there's a couple times he really navigated the pocket well, moved left and had a wide open receiver, and then he just missed the throw. So I'm like, all right, well, that's coachable, right? His footwork just needs to be a little bit better, make that throw. But then he also runs himself into a lot of sacks. And I don't know if that's because it's a really hard eval from his 2 lanes. So I'm excited to watch him go up against this Illinois defense because he got sacked 16 times. 8 of those were against Kansas State and Oklahoma in those 2 games. He was pressured 34 times in those 2 games alone. Tulane dropped 16 passes, including one against Rice. I mean, just dropped in the bucket. Perfect throw on a halfback wheel route, and he just hit him right in the hands for a touchdown. He missed it. So it's interesting to me, there's the play where it's just, he could have thrown a swing to the running back, and I actually freeze framed it. And I was going to tweet it, but I got busy doing my NFL predictions, so I didn't get a chance to. But if he throws it to the running back, it's probably a 5-yard gain. It's probably nothing, but he tucks the ball, runs, and he gets split between a defensive tackle and a defensive end. So I think him trusting his offensive line a little bit more maybe than he did at Tulane last year, I think that's going to go a long way, because mentally you could tell he's just like, oh, I've been pressured a bunch this game. I'm going to run. Like, I'm just instantly running to the right. All the receivers' routes are going left, and he just takes off and runs. And then, again, and maybe this is just the way that I play Madden and college football 26, but I am such a big proponent of play action. I think it's so important for the NFL. All 5 of Darian Mensah's interceptions came on play action. He had 10 turnover-worthy plays on play action. He had 5 fumbles last year as well. And again, that pressure to sack ratio in those games against better opponents was above 24%. So I think there's a lot of interesting evaluation to come with Mensah. I see almost 0% chance that he comes out and declares for the 2026 draft. And I think that's better for him. I think getting a full season at Duke, hopefully 2 full seasons at Duke, right? And then, kind of get into a similar situation to Jordan Love. I'm not sure he's going to be a first-round pick, draft and stash. I mean, no teams are doing that anymore, right? The days of Jordan Love or a player like Jordan Love sitting on the bench for 3 seasons is over, like, completely. That's never happening again. It's just not. So that's kind of unrealistic. But I think now that the transfer portal exists, and my comp for him being Jordan Love is almost like, if Jordan Love would have stepped up in competition from Utah State and been able to play at a Power 5 school for those last 2 years, then he would have been a little bit further ahead, I think, moving into the NFL. So I think that's the trajectory for Mensah. Like I said, I'd have Altmyer ahead of him right now just because, and for 2026, 100%. Like, I just don't think Mensah declares. But I think the ceiling for Mensah, like I said, could be that of Jordan Love's. So excited to watch him grow and excited to watch him, in this Duke offense.
And he's going to have to improve. Look, you look at the 2 quarterback classes that we're presumably going to have in 26 and 27. The Messiah may or may not come out this year, Arch Manning, but you're going to have the DJ Lagway. I'm on the thing that Nico at UCLA probably should wait a year, and come out in 27. We'll see. I do think Sellers comes out this year. I think Childs may wait until 27. Yeah. So, if you're in his inner circle, right, you're saying to him, these are the things we need you to work on, right? You're good on you're accurate on your intermediate things. We need you to stay an extra year, so that you could be coached through not locking onto your reads, and your awareness of your blind side. Right. And understanding the tempo now that you're, facing this competition. I tell you, we've got 2 very interesting quarterback drafts coming up. Who else do we want to cover if there's time? We want to stay with offense.
Yeah, let's stick with Mensah and the wide receivers, because I found an interesting note, and I'm so curious of how these wide receivers are going to, kind of attack the secondary that we talked about. Xavier Scott, Miles Scott, like, The secondary for Illinois is one of their strong points, in addition to Jacas, right? Rushing the passer. We talked about Matthew Bailey a little bit and kind of how that looks on the back end. The wide receivers for Duke, and again, they're playing Elon, but Cooper Barkate, who transferred over from Harvard, who was this FCS second-team All-American, had 5 receptions for 117 yards, so 23 yards a pop in week 1, 6'1", 195. Andrel Anthony, also 6'1", 195, started at Michigan, transferred to Oklahoma, hurt his knee in the Red River rivalry, was out for the remainder of the season. He averaged 17 yards per reception in week 1. And then Keyshawn Brown, who just based on his size, probably profiles more in the slot. He's 5'8", 165. He's only a redshirt sophomore, so likely 1 or 2 years down the road. But he had 6 catches for 93 yards in week 1. So again, they're playing Elon. So just seeing those receivers, step up against, a much better defense and like being able to have that game at home. I think it's fascinating for Mensah and the wide receivers to take on that matchup.
Yeah, and I want to shout out Andrel Anthony specifically. So Andrel Anthony, wide receiver, Duke. He made Brian Maffey's top 20 wide receiver list coming out of summer scouting.
Wow.
So that's a player that Brian has had his eyes on for a couple of years. Taylor, I think you referenced the injury. So he's coming back from an injury. He's not showing up. When I look at other people's boards, not showing up. But Brian had him in his top 20. So that's definitely a player I have my eyes on. If a draft professor says, hey, I like this guy, nobody's talking about him, of course I'm going to pay a little bit more attention. But Steve, what do you have on the wide receivers for Duke?
Yeah, so I'll start with Barkate. Taylor, you brought up most of the points. 6'1", 195 came over from Duke. He's actually a graduate transfer. His numbers, 23 career games that he was at Harvard. He had 19 starts, 113 receptions, 1,742 yards, and 14 touchdowns. It's pretty good. He's added some rushes in his career too. Let's see, what else do I have on him? Durability has been there. That's good. I do have on, I don't know if it's Keyshawn or Kayshawn. I'm going to go with Kayshawn. Okay. So he's, slot wide receiver and a punt returner. He's a sophomore, so it's a name that we could be talking about for a couple of years. Once again, and we brought this up, I think, in 2 of our shows, or actually, I apologize. We brought it up last week, and it got brought up in the Texas-Ohio State show, that there is a role in the NFL for these little guys, right? And Keyshawn is 5'8", 165. He was a track star. He's got the great speed and agility. His hands as a freshman, 41 receptions, 445 yards, 2 touchdowns. That was actually, was it second or third? That was third, I'm sorry, in the team. And he did set some Duke, records. I didn't have anything, but but that's why we have Brian to fill in my gaps.
Yeah. I just want to say, Steve, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think the last thing we need to talk about are the pass catchers for Illinois. And one of them is also a punt returner, Hank Beatty. Are we talking about his? He almost a 70-yard punt return for a touchdown last week. He's another guy's 5'11", 185. I think he had 100 yards receiving in that game as well. And
133 punt return yards.
And he had 100 yards receiving on top of that. Yeah. So he had a really, really good game. I know it was against Western Illinois, but Steve's exactly right. There is a role for that in the NFL, right? Where we're not fantasy football. We're not a fantasy football podcast. These are guys on the 53. Hank Beatty could be he's that dynamic of a returner. And then they also had Hudson Clement transfer from West Virginia, although I think he only had 1 or 2 receptions in week 1. Again, Western Illinois, so he'll be someone that impacts the game down the road. But Justin Bowick, have we heard that name before, Jim? 6'4", 210-pound wide receiver who Brett Bielema talked up. Size, speed, agility. He had 2 touchdowns in week 1. Already has a really good chemistry with Altmyer. From everything I heard, he started his career at Eastern Illinois, transferred to Ball State, and then now finds himself at Illinois. And like I said, 2 touchdowns in week 1. So I'm really excited to see his development because I think, having that kind of bigger receiver on the outside with, Beatty and then Clement kind of working the underneath, I think it's a really strong offense with those running backs as well.
So this is what I got. Taylor, you had shared Justin with me, and I got a little bit of a chance to look him up before, we came on the show. Yeah. So the 2 years at Eastern Illinois, the Ball State year last year was shortened due to the injury. A 52-3 win. He has the multi-alignment capability, but I see him both here in college and in the pros as a boundary receiver. I mean, he's a heck of a red zone target, right? You want a quarterback that's going to need a receiver for a back shoulder fade. Bowick is going to be your guy. In terms of how I rank different traits, his football IQ is up there. His yards after the catches play strength is one of the lower ones. Mm-hmm. His blocking is actually better than what gets really talked about with him. He is excellent at his release and his press handling. So, he's an exciting target for Altmyer. So I'm glad you brought him up and you mentioned him to me.
Yeah, sure. And we should also I like giving credit to the Illinois receiver coach, because Illinois last year, Pat Bryant went, but they had a second receiver in the draft last year. He may have not actually gotten drafted, but I thought that they had two. Then the year before, I believe Isaiah Williams, he went to Detroit's training camp. Then I think he was at the Bengals training camp. So Illinois has put, I believe, 3 wide receivers into NFL training camps the last 2 years. So even if those guys for Illinois that you guys mentioned are not at the top 15 of the wide receiver board.
Yeah, for sure.
If they block, they have a path to making the 53. And then Taylor, even to your point, if you can return punts as wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, that's a role that the NFL covets as well, right? Because we're not looking for fantasy football wide receivers. I love that, Taylor. We are looking for NFL wide receivers for a 53-man roster.
Yep. So, Zachary Franklin's who you're thinking of as well. And he was
That's
8th in FBS history in career reception. So absolutely good shout out to Illinois' wide receiver coach. And then I think if we have time, the last thing I wanted to talk about was the tight ends. One of them you had on your list, Jim, for us, and one of them you did not. I actually like the one that you did not have on the list even better. So you had Davin Stoffel on the list. So he's a transfer from South Dakota, 6'6", 260 pounds. Quite honestly, he played for South Dakota State, but he didn't really have that much of an impact. So it's interesting to see his size. And when you go to the depth chart, he's actually listed. And I want to shout out Max for this, because watching his tight end breakdown, I completely changed how I looked at the position. I think he is listed as a starter at tight end F, right? Well, the listed starter at tight end Y, his name is Tanner Arkin, 6'4", 265 pounds, gets really involved in the run game. And Tanner Arkin, to me, I looked it up based on what I think he'll test, which is in the 4.8, 4.9 range in terms of speed wise. Other tight ends to be drafted at that size, right? 6'4", I did a range of 260 to 269. By the way, I love the NFL combine IQ thing. If you guys need that, I love comparing players via that, what they test, what they measure. And the reason for my comp for Tanner Arkin is Will Dissly. I think he's a very Will Dissly type of player where he's going to be on the field because he does everything right. He blocks, he can catch passes, he can separate from linebackers when he needs to. He has the size. I think he's an NFL player. I think he's a day 3 tight end. I think he's someone that can contribute early. I think he's going to be a tight end 2, tight end 3. He'll play special teams. He'll kind of do it all. I think he's a huge piece of their offense. And just watching the film, you can't miss 85. Right? He's right on your screen. So I'm excited about Tanner Arkin, and I actually am excited to see his matchup against the one player on the list that we haven't talked about is Duke's linebacker Tre Freeman. So I think that could be an interesting matchup. Steve, what do you think about Arkin and that matchup with Freeman?
So just the notes that I pulled on Arkin, another thing that maybe you agree is opposed to Stoffel, Arkin also has some halfback versatility.
Yep.
That H-back role. Okay. Who were we talking about? Freeman. Give me 1 second. Got to find him. Why don't you start off? Because I'm scrolling.
Well, I can filibuster for you. So Tanner Arkin was a tight end. Ironically, Max and I had a conversation because I was asking, okay, what tight ends should we be podcasting about? And Arkin was one of the 8 best blockers that Max identified in this class, which goes to the point of he's a wide tight end.
Yep.
And ultimately, if you're not familiar with Max's theory of evaluating tight ends, if you can't block in line, you're a slot receiver of a specific size. You're not really like an F tight end that doesn't block is really a slot wide receiver that should be compared to other slot wide receivers.
Yep.
And if you're not familiar with that concept, check out the Remember the Tight End Substack from Max. Excellent job evaluating tight ends there. But Steve, did I filibuster long enough for you?
Yeah, thank you. It helps if I kept turning in the right direction. Okay, so he is a senior, 6'2", 230. A couple of things that I would say, but at the top of the list is, he's the green dot calling the plays for that defense, and he is a tackling machine. All right, he's durable, he's instinctive, he's a good athlete. 106 tackles last year, which put him actually 6th in the ACC. If you look at a guy who has those traits, I look at the 49ers as Fred Warner, and there are some similarities there, okay, in the usage, in the capabilities. But yeah, again, just a durable guy, very instinctive, and he don't miss.
No, he does not. I think it's interesting that you had him at 6'2". I had him at 6 foot, so I'll be interested to see how he measures out, and that's what he's listed on Duke's official website. So that's kind of interesting.
Okay.
If he tested 6'2", I am way higher on him than I was him testing at 6 foot. There's a similar linebacker that I would comp him to that's in college football right now. It's Desmond Purnell. I'm a K-State fan. He's Kansas State's linebacker. He's undersized, but he's a beast, right? He's going to be around the ball. He's going to tackle. He's going to make plays. And the thing that stands out to Freeman, to me, I think if he is 6 foot, 230, I think he's a little undersized for that outside, like will linebacker role. But he has really good instincts and awareness, which allows him to play faster. He's also one of 9 ACC players to have at least 67 tackles the last 2 years. And then what I thought was interesting is, and this is, I think, voted upon by the Duke football team, but he earned the Micah Harris Trinity Teammate Award, which is given for inspiration, commitment, and selflessness. So you just see the off the field stuff as well with Freeman. So I'd love to see how he tests, and I'm really excited to watch that matchup. Him going against the tight ends and up the middle for calling the plays for Duke in that game, especially at home against a quarterback like Altmyer. It's going to be a chess match, and I'm excited to watch that.
You bring up the wide receivers. I also want to see the running back Feagin. See Freeman come on down and take him on head on. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, I like the shout out for Freeman. I think you've covered Freeman in more detail than any podcast. Like, we may have spent more time on Freeman on this podcast than we have on even like the CJ Allens of the world. Because both of you appeared to have a really similar analysis, and that's not a player that's being talked about.
Yeah, he's definitely interesting from a leadership perspective, right? I think that's kind of where he sets himself apart.
And if he can play special teams, that's a round 5, 6, or 7 draft pick that you hang your hat on as a GM, because your floor is a special teams player that might be able to run your defense in a year. So I definitely like that call out. Why don't we pause for some commercials so that everybody can know about all of the draft content you make, and then we'll close this down for a big finish. So, Steve.
Yeah. The X handle is in the description at Steve SWFL. That's also the how to find me on YouTube. The show I do is called Talk Tape and Turbines. The Turbines focuses on New York Jets content, but they're scouting things. They do a lot of work with a lot of the other draft professors and more things as we, get through more of the, not only the NCAA, but the NFL season.
Taylor.
Yep, same thing as Steve. You can see my handle down here on X. You can follow me there. And then I have a blog, footballwithchaw.com, which is also a YouTube channel. And I'm just really fascinated right now with quarterbacks and how they, and Steve brought this up earlier, but how they game manage, right? Like if you look at it, like the way Garrett Nussmeier, and he managed the game, right? But I think that it's seen in a negative context, and what I'm finding from going through this tape and really studying it with the plays. I did Avery Johnson and Rocco Becht from week 0, and I think there's a lot more from the quarterback position than stats. There's a lot more mental. There's a lot of things like that. So I have a lot more content on that coming. I'm going to look at Nussmeier versus Klubnik, and then I want to watch Sawyer Robertson and Jackson Arnold as well. I already kind of mapped out those videos, so those are going to be coming as well. And then once we start to get into Big 12 play, I'm planning on doing a Big 12 show, just a weekly Big 12 show. So you can find that over on the blog as well, and then on the YouTube channel, which is the same thing, Football with Chaw. So back to you, Jim.
Well, thank you. So you can follow the channel at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. You can follow on X. You can follow on YouTube. And when you follow, you will get daily draft content. We podcast 2 times a day, 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. This is the early show. The late show tonight is previewing the Oklahoma-Michigan game. Next week at this time is the Oregon-Northwestern game. So that's going to be probably a podcast that is 75 to 90% Oregon. But wow, we've got a good matchup of an edge against an offensive tackle that we're going to be measuring Caleb Tiernan against. So we've got a couple guys from Northwestern that we'll be mentioning. It will be heavily Oregon, I am confident. Daily draft content, the month of September, we're breaking down college football games and telling you the draft prospects in the game. We can give you a little bit on is a player day 2, day 3, but even if you noticed, once we got towards the end of this podcast, we barely mentioned if the player was day 3 or if we have him as UDFA. And that's kind of on purpose. We haven't done full evals yet. So we're just trying to make sure that we know which players we should be monitoring as the season progresses. But that being said, we have been going for 75 minutes. For Steve, Taylor, myself, the 91 podcasters at the Draft Professor, thank you so much for watching, everybody, and we'll see you on a podcast again in about 45 minutes.